Oh, let the waitress play mother. Someone in this family should. The words traveled across the private room the way a dropped glass travels, and every fork at the long table went still. Sorrel Ashby stood beside the smallest chair at the Vespera with her hand not quite touching the shoulder of a child who had not spoken in 1 year. She had known the room might turn. She had counted on the guests being too polished to turn. She had been wrong about the second part. Ottavia Wren sat at the center of the table in a dress the color of pale smoke, a ring on her finger bright enough to be seen from the kitchen doors. She was smiling. The smile had an audience, and the audience was 30 of the most careful people in the city, and every one of them was now looking at the waitress. "I am sorry," Sorrel said. The apology left her before she chose to give it. It always did. The plate came straight from the pass. It was too hot for her hands. I only moved it. "You knelt beside my fiancée's daughter and whispered to her like she was something you found in the rain," Ottavia said. "In front of my guests. On the night of my engagement. Tell me, do they teach that in whatever place hires girls like you, or did you invent it yourself?" A soft laugh moved down one side of the table, the kind that waited for permission and then arrived all at once. Sorrel had done a small thing. That was what made the heat climb into her face now. She had done almost nothing. The girl, Della, had been placed at the far end of the table like a chair nobody expected to use, and a runner had set a plate in front of her fresh off the fire, and the child had gone rigid in the particular way Sorrel had learned to read across a dozen frightened rooms. Not rudeness, not slowness, the stillness of someone bracing to be looked at. So Sorrel had swapped the burning plate for a cooler one from the side station, and because she did not want the girl to feel watched, she had folded a napkin into a small, clumsy shape and set it beside the child's hand, without a word. No demand, no say hello to the nice people, nothing the girl had to answer. For that, the room had turned. At the head of the table, a man had not moved at all. Dario Malvasi sat with one hand resting flat beside an untouched glass, and the quiet around him was different from the quiet everywhere else. It was older. Men twice Sorrel's age had lowered their voices when he entered earlier, the way people lower their voices in a building where something important is kept. He had said perhaps 4 words all evening. He did not need more. Sorrel had been warned about him on her first night at the Vespera, warned in the low, careful sentences the staff used for the name that signed their checks. She had understood only that he owned the room, and that the room was grateful to be owned quietly. He was looking at his daughter now, not at Ottavia, not at Sorrel, at the child. "Take the plate away," Ottavia said, "and yourself with it. We will not need you again tonight." Sorrel reached for the plate. Her fingers, which had been perfectly steady while she folded the napkin, began to shake the instant she felt the room's eyes settle on her hands. She hated that. She had spent years hating that. Her hand closed on the rim, and a smaller hand closed on her wrist. Della had turned in her chair. The child was looking up at Sorrel, and her fingers were wrapped around Sorrel's wrist, holding her there, holding her in place, and the whole polished table watched a girl who had not made a sound in 1 year open her mouth. "Stay," Della said. The word was small and rough, like a hinge that had not been asked to move in a long time. For a moment, nobody at the table understood what they had heard. Then a woman near the middle set down her glass too hard, and a man murmured something, and the murmur spread, because half the people in that room had been told, over months, in the delicate way such things are told, that the Malvasi girl did not speak. Specialists had said it. 2 of them were seated at that very table, guests of honor, men who had been paid a great deal to explain the child's silence in language that cost extra. They were staring now like everyone else. Ottavia's smile did not survive the sentence. It went somewhere behind her face and did not come back the same. "She is confused," Ottavia said. "Children imitate. It means nothing." But Della had not let go of Sorrel's wrist. She was holding on with the grip of someone who had found a railing on a dark stair, and she was not looking at her father, or at the woman in the smoke-colored dress, or at the 2 men who had been paid to fix her. She was looking at the waitress, and she said it again, quieter, only for the 2 of them. "Stay." Sorrel knelt. She did it slowly, the way she did everything that mattered, keeping her movements below the level of the child's eyes so that nothing about her arrived too fast. She did not gather Della up. She did not tell her how wonderful she was, how brave, how everyone was so happy, all the bright, heavy things adults piled onto a child at exactly the wrong moment. She simply came down to the small chair's height and let the girl keep the wrist. "I am not going anywhere you can see me leave from," Sorrel said. "Is this seat taken?" Della shook her head once. Sorrel drew out the empty chair beside the girl and sat in it, in her black work apron, at the engagement dinner of the most feared man in the city, and picked up the folded napkin and turned it into a slightly better shape and set it down again and waited. She did not fill the silence. She had learned that the silence was not the enemy. The rush to end it was the enemy. Every specialist who had ever failed this child had failed her by talking into that silence, kneeling too close, asking the same question in 7 kind voices, waiting with their whole bodies for the girl to perform. Sorrel had watched 3 tables worth of important people do it to Della across the evening. She had watched the child close like a hand each time. She was not being difficult, she was being crowded. "You do not have to do that again," Sorrel said, meaning the word, meaning the whole trembling public thing. "You did it once. That is enough for one night. You can keep the rest for when the room is smaller." Della looked at her. Something in the child's shoulders came down half an inch. Across the table, one of the specialists had recovered enough to speak. "Miss, if I may, this is a clinically significant moment, and it should be handled by someone with training in selective—" "She has had a year of training in the room," Sorrel said, and then stopped, appalled at herself, because a waitress did not interrupt a man like that in a room like this. Her hand found the edge of the table and gripped it, waiting for the ceiling to come down. It did not come down. At the head of the table, Dario Malvasi had finally moved. He had turned his head, and he was looking at Sorrel now with an attention that was worse than anger, because anger she knew how to survive. This was only interest, cold and complete, the interest of a man who noticed everything and forgave the noticing in no one. "Finish the sentence," he said. His voice was not loud. Nothing about him was loud. "You began telling my guest what a year in the room has done for my daughter. Finish it." The whole table waited for the waitress to fold. It was, Sorrel understood, what she was supposed to do. Apologize, drop something, become small enough to forget by dessert. She could feel the old shape of it in her own chest, the reflex to make herself the joke before anyone else could. Somewhere under her ribs, a voice that sounded like her father said, "Do not embarrass yourself. You always take a small thing and make it a scene." But Della's hand was still on her wrist, and with the child's hand there, Sorrel's own did not shake. "Every person here has knelt in front of her tonight and asked her to talk," Sorrel said. "You put her at the loud end of the table and told her to say hello to strangers. You handed her a plate too hot to hold and did not watch to see if she could hold it. She is not silent because something is broken in her. She goes quiet because the room keeps doing the one thing that frightens her, which is waiting for her to speak. I stopped waiting. That is the whole trick. I promise you, it is not worth what you paid the gentleman across the table." The dinner ended earlier than it was meant to. These things do once the evening has done something no one planned and the guests want to be somewhere they can talk about it. Cars came to the side of the Vespera. Ottavia left on the arm of a senator's wife, and the look she gave Sorrel on the way out was not a look a person forgets, a bright, polished promise of a debt to be collected later. Sorrel was in the back corridor stacking the good glasses when Emile, the floor manager, found her. Emile had hired her 6 weeks earlier and had spent most of those weeks quietly hoping she would turn out to be reliable. His face said the hope was over. "Do you know what you did?" he said. It was not a question. "You sat down. At his table, you argued with Dr. Vell in front of the entire room. Sorrel. Nobody sits at that table who was not born to sit at it. The child asked me to. The child does not sign the checks. Emil pressed 2 fingers to the space between his eyes. I have to let you go. You understand that I have to. It is not... Emil. A third voice from the mouth of the corridor. Marek stood there, one of the men who moved through the Vespera like furniture that could hurt you, and Marek did not usually speak to waitresses, and he was speaking to this one. Mr. Malvasi wants the girl, not gone, in the small room, now. Emil's hand came off his face. He looked at Sorrel the way a man looks at someone who has just been handed either a promotion or a sentence and cannot yet tell which. The small room was off the wine cellar, a low, warm space with 1 lamp and a single window looking onto the frozen kitchen garden, and Dario Malvasi was standing at that window with his back to the door when Sorel came in. Della was not with him. It was only the 2 of them, and the lamp and the enormous, careful quiet the man carried the way other men carried cologne. You were going to be dismissed, he said, without turning. I was. You are not. He turned then. Up close, without the length of a table between them, he was younger than his reputation, and more tired than his tailoring, and his eyes did the thing she had already learned to distrust, which was to take in the whole of a person in a single, unhurried pass. My daughter has been seen by 9 specialists in the past year, the best that money finds. She has been assessed, coaxed, rewarded, recorded. Tonight a waitress with a folded napkin got a word out of her that I have not heard since her mother died. I would like to understand how before I decide what it means. I did not get anything out of her, Sorrel said. That is the part your 9 men keep missing. You cannot get a word out of a child like that. You can only make a room she is willing to speak into. Then you wait, and you do not lean forward while you wait. Something crossed his face, brief, and then gone, the way weather crosses a window. Where did you learn to make such a room? The honest answer had a name in it, and a house, and a small brother who used to go silent under a kitchen table while a man's voice got louder above him, and Sorrel had no intention of putting any of that on the table of a man she had met an hour ago. I have had practice being the person who does not make it worse, she said. It is not a skill anyone puts on a resume. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I will pay you to sit with her. Afternoons. Separate from your work on the floor if you wish to keep the floor, though I cannot imagine why you would. You will not be asked to fix her. There is nothing to fix. You will be asked to be the room. It was, Sorrel thought, the most anyone had offered her in years, and everything in her past told her that the things men offered came with a second, quieter price written somewhere she would not find until it was due. I would want the terms where I can see them, she said. In writing. Hours. What I will and will not do. And 1 line that says the day I decide it is bad for her, I can stop, and no one asks me why. Dario Malvasi looked at the waitress who had sat down at his table, and for the second time that night his mouth did something that was almost, not quite, a smile. You negotiate, he said, like someone who has been made to regret trusting a handshake. Is that a yes to the writing? It is. He picked up a card from the table by the lamp and turned it once in his fingers, and did not hand it to her. Come tomorrow at 4. The small room, not the floor. And Miss Ashby. He paused, and the whole weight of the house seemed to pause with him. My fiancée will not forgive what happened tonight. She forgives very little, and she forgets nothing, and she will have you watched. I am telling you this because you should know the shape of what you are walking into before you decide to walk into it. Sorrel thought of the small, hard word the child had pressed into the silent room. Stay. She thought of how her own hand had gone steady the instant it was needed. I have been watched by worse than her, she said, for less reason. 4 o'clock. She left him at the window with the card still in his hand. Behind her, in a room she could not see, a girl who had spoken once in a year was already deciding, in the way children decide everything, all at once and without telling anyone, that she would do it again. The small room had been made wrong before Sorrel arrived. Someone with training and good intentions had prepared it for her. A low table stood in the center with a fan of thick, clean paper squared to the edge, a cup of new pencils sharpened to identical points, and a slim recorder with a light already glowing red. 2 chairs had been placed to face each other across the table, close, the way a chair faces a chair in a room where one person intends to get something out of another. On the wall, someone had taped a bright chart of cartoon faces, happy to sad, with the word feelings printed above them in a cheerful hand. Della sat in the far corner, on the floor, with her back to all of it. Sorrel set down the canvas bag she had carried from the tram. Then she turned the recorder off, unplugged it, and put it in a drawer. She took down the chart of faces and laid it face down on the windowsill. She moved one chair to the side of the table so that whoever sat there would face the same wall, not each other. She left the good paper where it was but did not touch it. From her bag, she took a rubber band ball of pens with chewed caps, a stack of the flimsy order tickets they used at the Vespera, printed on one side and blank on the other, and a small brass bell of the kind that sits on a hotel desk. Only then did she sit down on the floor, near the girl but not beside her, close enough to be reached and far enough not to reach. "This is yours," Sorrel said, and set the bell on the floor between them. "When you ring it, we stop. Whatever we are doing, we stop, and I go and sit by the door, and nobody asks you why. You do not owe anybody a reason for ringing a bell." She nudged it a finger's width toward the child. "Try it, so you know it works." Della looked at the bell for a long time. Then she reached out one finger and tapped it, and the small, clear note rang out, and Sorrel stood immediately, without hurry and without sulking, and went and sat by the door with her back against the frame. She did not look at the girl. She took out an order ticket and began, quietly, to fold it, the way she had folded the napkin at the dinner, into a small, clumsy shape that was not quite a bird and not quite anything. She hummed nothing. She said nothing. She folded a second one. 3 minutes passed. That was the whole of it. 3 minutes of a grown woman sitting on the floor of a wine cellar folding paper for no one, and not once turning to check whether it was working. A shadow moved into the light beside her. Della had crossed the room. The girl sat down against the other side of the doorframe, not touching, and picked up one of the folded tickets and turned it over in her hands, and set it down, and looked at the pens. "Those are the ugly ones," Sorrel said, as though remarking on the weather. "The good paper is on the table. I never use it. New paper always looks like it is expecting something." She slid a blank-backed ticket across the floor. "The backs of these do not expect anything. You can ruin as many as you want." The girl took a pen. She uncapped it with her teeth, which was not how anyone had taught her, and she began to draw on the back of a Vespera order ticket. And Sorrel watched from the side of her eye and kept folding, and did not say one single word about what the drawing was. It was a house, a crooked house with too many windows and a door that did not sit square in its frame, and a chimney leaning off the roof like a hat about to fall, and out one of the too many windows a face looked, small with a straight line for a mouth. And in front of the house, larger than the house, so large that her head went off the top of the ticket, a woman. The woman had no straight line for a mouth. The woman was drawn, smiling. Sorrel felt something move in her chest and did not let it reach her face, because the fastest way to lose the room would be to make the drawing important. She had learned that in a kitchen a long time ago, from a boy who would stop whatever he was doing the instant an adult looked at it as though it mattered. "That is a good door," she said. "It does not sit right. Real doors never do." Della looked at her. Then the girl took the pen and, under the woman with the smile, wrote 3 letters in the wandering capitals of a child who has not been let write nearly enough. She turned the ticket around so it faced Sorrel. It said, "Stay." Sorrel's hand, which had been perfectly steady folding paper, went still. She was aware, distantly, that she should say something wise, and that she had nothing wise, and that this was probably correct. "I am not going anywhere you can see me leave from," she said, which was what she had said at the table, and the girl's straight-line mouth bent, very slightly, at one end. Neither of them heard the door at the top of the cellar stair. Sorrel only knew Dario Malvasi was there because Della's eyes moved past her shoulder and the small bent mouth went straight again. Sorrel turned. He was standing 3 steps up, in the dark of the stair, where a man stands when he does not want to be counted as being in the room. He had come, she understood, to observe. To watch the waitress work the way he had watched 9 specialists work. To assess, to decide what it meant. He had the face he wore for assessing, still and closed and slightly bored. He was looking at the ticket in his daughter's hand, at the crooked house and the smiling woman and the 3 wandering letters, and the assessing face was not holding. She watched something come up under it, the way water comes up under thin ice, and she watched the most feared man in the city realize that he was about to be seen, in a doorway, failing to keep his own face, by a waitress and a child. He did not clear his throat and make it a speech. He did the other thing, the thing that told Sorrel more about him than any warning from the staff had. He stepped back into the dark of the stair, quietly, so that the girl would not have to watch her father cry, and he let them keep the room. When the hour was over, Sorrel packed her bag slowly and said it was time, and Della picked up the brass bell and held it out to her, and Sorrel closed the child's fingers back around it. "No, that one is yours," Sorrel said. "It stays wherever you are, so the way out is always in your room. I will bring one of my own, so it is in mine too. Then neither of us is ever stuck." Della considered this with the seriousness of a small judge. Then she picked up the order ticket with the crooked house and the smiling woman and the 3 wandering letters, and she pressed it into Sorrel's hand instead, and folded Sorrel's fingers over it, and Sorrel understood that the child was not giving away a drawing. She was making sure a piece of the room went home in Sorrel's pocket, so that there would be no way for the room to end without her. The call came 11 nights later, at something past 2 in the morning. Sorrel lived above a shut diner at the wrong end of the tram line, 3 rooms that had been 1 room until a landlord got greedy with a partition wall, with a window that looked onto the backs of other windows. She had chosen it for the shut diner underneath, which she could see through the front glass when she came home late, the stools bolted to the floor, the counter under its film of dust, the dark griddle waiting. She kept an old coffee tin on the shelf above her hot plate, a strip of tape across it reading one word, counter. And into it went every folded bill she did not absolutely have to spend, because one day the diner downstairs was going to have a light in the window that said the counter was open, and no one who was cold would be turned away from it. She was asleep with the tin above her head when the phone rang, and she knew before she answered that it was the house, because no one else called Sorrel Ashby at 2 in the morning to ask anything of her. It was Marek. In the background there was a sound she felt in her own teeth. The high, thin sound of a child who has gone past crying into somewhere worse. "She woke," Marek said. He was a man built to sound calm, and he did not quite sound calm. "A dream. She will not come out of it. The doctor gave her something and it did nothing. She is not speaking. She is." He stopped. "She has the bell. She keeps ringing the bell." Sorrel was already pulling a coat over the clothes she slept in. "Put the phone by her. Do not talk over me." There was a rustle, and then the small, terrible sound was very close, and Sorrel sat down on the edge of her bed in the dark with the phone against her ear and did the only thing she knew how to do. She did not tell the child it was all right. It was plainly not all right. She began, very quietly, to talk about the crooked house, about the door that did not sit square, about how she thought the chimney needed 1 more window under it, and whether the smiling woman might want a dog, a ridiculous dog, a dog the size of the house, and what they might name a dog that size. She talked about nothing, in a low, even voice, the way you lay a plank across water. And slowly, over minutes, the sound on the other end of the line changed. It came down out of the high place. It became crying, and then it became breathing, and then it became a small, hoarse voice that had used itself up saying 1 word all night. "Stay. Della said, into the phone. I am not going anywhere you cannot hear me leave from, Sorrel said. Give the phone to the tall man. Marek came back on. There was a silence behind him now. Where is her father? Sorrel said. On his way home. He was in the city. A pause. He is outside your building. She had not heard the car. She went to the window and moved the curtain, and there below in the dark street, absurd as a wolf in a parlor, was a long dark car, and Dario Malvasi was standing beside it in a coat that cost more than the diner she was saving for, and in his other arm, wrapped in a blanket, too big to be carried and being carried anyway, was his daughter. He had not sent Marek to bring the child to the house. He had driven the child across the whole sleeping city to the Waitress, because the Waitress was where the word worked. Sorrel went down in her sleeping clothes and her coat and opened the street door, and for a moment the three of them stood in the cold under the dead diner's sign, the powerful man and the emptied-out child and the woman who bussed tables, and none of the ordinary rules about who stood where seemed to have made the trip. I did not know where else the word would work, Dario said. It was, she would think later, the most honest sentence she ever heard him speak, and he spoke it first, before anything else, the way you confess the thing you are most ashamed of so you do not have to carry it up the stairs. Bring her in, Sorrel said. Mind the second step. It leans. He came up into her 3 small rooms, this man whose name made senators careful, and he had to stoop under the partition wall, and he stood holding his sleeping daughter in a kitchen the size of his car, while a coffee tin-marked counter watched him from a shelf, and he did not say one word about the size of it, or the hot plate, or the film of dust on the dead griddle in the shut diner below. He only looked at the window that gave onto the backs of other windows, and then he looked at Sorrel, and something in the set of his shoulders came down half an inch, the way his daughters had, at the same table, a lifetime ago, and 11 days. You may put her on the bed, Sorrel said. It is the only soft thing I own. He put the child down as carefully as if the bed were made of the good clean paper no one was allowed to touch, and then, because there was nowhere in the room to stand that was not close to someone, Dario Malvasi looked at the single chair by the hot plate and did the thing that Sorrel would remember longest out of the whole long night. May I sit? He asked. He had taken the word from her without knowing he had taken it. She thought of him at the head of his own table, owning every chair in the room without asking. And she thought that a man learning to ask for a chair at 2 in the morning was either the beginning of something or the most dangerous kind of trick, and she was too tired to know which. It is taken, she said. Then, watching his face do the small, stricken thing. By you. Sit down. I will make tea, because it is the only other thing I own. He came back. That was the part Sorrel had not planned for. The arrangement had a shape, 4 o'clock, the small room, terms in writing, and the shape did not include Dario Malvasi in her kitchen above the dead diner. But Della's best hour was not 4 o'clock in a wine cellar. Della's best hour, they discovered, was late and warm and small, in a room where the woman with no straight-line mouth was making something plain to eat and not watching the child do anything. And so the sessions came to her, and the father came with them, because a man cannot send his daughter across a sleeping city alone, and a man who has carried her once finds he would rather carry her again than hand her to Marek. Sorrel fed them the way she knew how to feed people, which was plainly and well. Toasted cheese cut into strips a child could hold without being asked to hold it. Tomato soup that had never seen a Tuesday because Sorrel made it fresh each time and would sooner have served nothing. Dario Malvasi, who owned a supper club and could have eaten anything the city could cook, sat at a table meant for one and ate toasted cheese cut into strips, and the first time he did it, Sorrel had to turn to the hot plate so he would not see her face. He tried to pay for it. Of course he did. It was the language he had. The good paper came first. A ream of it, heavy and white, sent to her door with a card in a hard, slanting hand, for the child's work. Sorrel sent it back. He sent it again. She put it, unopened, on the dead diner's counter downstairs, where it could go on expecting things of the dust, and she gave Della the backs of order tickets, and Della filled them with crooked houses. When Dario asked evenly why his daughter drew on rubbish when he had bought her the best paper in the city, Sorrel said, "Because the best paper in the city is watching her. The rubbish does not care what she does. Neither should you out loud." He was quiet a while. The next ream of paper did not come. What came instead, one evening, was a shoebox of till rolls and receipt spools and the used order tickets from a whole week at the Vespera, blank sides up, delivered without a card, and Sorrel laughed out loud in her empty stairwell, alone, holding the rubbish a feared man had gathered for a child on purpose. She framed one of the drawings, not the best one. A crooked house with the smiling woman too big for the ticket, the first one, the stay one, and she hung it on the one bare wall exactly as it was, off-center, the tape showing, and when Dario offered to have it mounted properly, in something that did not show the tape, she said, "No. If you straighten it, she will think the crooked one was wrong. Nothing she made is going to be told it was wrong in this room." And he looked at the drawing off-center on the bare wall for a long moment, and he did not offer again. She would not take his money for the extra hours either. He put an amount in a new set of terms, a large amount, and slid the paper across the small table, and Sorrel read it and took the pen he offered, and drew a line through the number and wrote a smaller one, the same as her afternoon rate, no more. "You are the only person alive who has ever made my numbers smaller," he said. "Then your numbers have had an easy life. Why? Because the day you are paying me too much is the day I have to wonder what the too much is for." She set down the pen. "I have been bought before, not with money, with a roof and a car in my name that I could not use without asking, and 100 small kindnesses I was expected to be grateful enough for to stop noticing the size of the leash. I am not for sale at my rate or above it. But at my rate, I am the best thing that has happened to your daughter, and we both know it, so pay me my rate and stop trying to own the good luck." He signed at the smaller number. Then he turned the paper over, and on the back, in the hard slanting hand, he wrote a line of his own and slid it back to her. It said, "No session with the child will be recorded or observed by any specialist without her knowing they are there." She looked up. It was not a thing she had asked for. It was a thing she would have asked for. "You take her side," Sorrel said, "against your own doctors." "I take the side of the room where she speaks," Dario said. "I have started to suspect they are the same side. She learned him in pieces, the way you learn a difficult recipe, by getting it wrong and paying attention. He did not sleep. He read every page twice, and the second time was slower, and it meant he was worried. He removed his watch before he did anything with his hands, and he was always, he claimed, not doing anything with his hands, right up until the leaning second step was mended, and the partition door that stuck no longer stuck, and the dead griddle downstairs, which he had no business touching, had been cleaned of 2 years of dust one evening while Della napped, and when Sorrel came down and found him with his sleeves pushed up and greased to the elbow, he said only, it was offending the window, and would not meet her eye. And under all of it, at the edge of all of it, was the wedding. It had a date. Sorrel learned the date the way the staff learned everything, sideways, from Emile, who learned it from the florists. The first Saturday of June. Ottavia Wren would marry Dario Malvasi on the first Saturday of June. In a cathedral the family had paid to re-roof, and there were fewer than 4 months left of the counting, and every plain, warm evening in Sorel's 3 small rooms was a thing that was happening inside that count, borrowed against a Saturday that already had Ottavia's name on it. Sorrel knew it. She told herself she knew it every time she cut the cheese into strips. She was not always convincing, even to herself, and the least convincing moments were the ones where Dario, leaving, would pause at her door and not open it, and ask, as though the answer were not obvious, whether he should come again tomorrow, and Sorrel would say yes before she had decided to, the same way the apology had left her at the dinner, the same way every true thing left her, before she could weigh it. The night the Count first cut her, Della had fallen asleep on the bed that was the only soft thing Sorrel owned, and Dario stood in the doorway putting on the coat that cost more than the counter, and he looked at the drawing off center on the bare wall. The crooked house, the smiling woman too big for the ticket, and he said quietly, not quite to Sorrel, her mother drew like that. Too big, off the edge of every page, as though the page were the thing that was wrong and not her. It was the first time he had said one word about the woman whose smile the child kept drawing over her own straight-line mouth, and Sorrel stood very still, because she had learned in a kitchen a long time ago that when a frightened thing finally comes to the doorway, you do not lean forward. He did not come further through it, not that night. He put on the coat and asked whether he should come tomorrow, and she said yes ahead of her permission, and he went down the leaning stair he had mended into the cold, and Sorrel stood in her 3 small rooms with a sleeping child and a coffee tin marked counter and the drawing on the wall, and counted, against her own advice, the Saturdays that were left. The crooked house on the wall gained people slowly, over weeks, the way a real house does. First, it had only the smiling woman too big for the page, then a small figure in a window with a straight line for a mouth, then a tall, dark figure at the door, drawn without a face because Della did not yet draw her father's face, only the shape of him, only the largeness. And one evening, while a thin rain worked at the window and the child slept on the only soft thing Sorrel owned, Dario stood looking at the newest ticket on the wall and went very still, and Sorrel came to see what had stopped him. Della had drawn a 4th figure, a small one. Under the table in the crooked house, tucked into the dark space where the legs met, a figure with its knees pulled up and its arms around them, hiding. It was not the child. The child was still in her window. This was someone else, someone smaller, put where a person goes when the room above the table is not safe. That is not anyone in this house, Dario said quietly. Who did she draw? Sorrel had spent a long time not saying it to anyone. She found, to her surprise, that she wanted to say it to him. My brother, she said. Bram. When we were small. Our mother left, and after that our father filled the house up by himself, and there was a lot of him, and not much air. Bram was little, 4, 5. When our father's voice climbed, Bram climbed too, under the kitchen table, into the dark part where the legs meet, and he went so quiet you would forget a child was in the room at all. She looked at the small hiding figure her own client had drawn out of the air. I was 7. I could not make the voice stop. I was too small to make anything stop. So I learned the only thing a 7-year-old can do. I learned to make the space under the table safe. I would go in after him with a heel of bread, and I would not ask him to come out, and I would not ask him to talk. And I would not lean in. I would just be the part of the room that was not waiting for him to fail. And after a while he would come out. Not because I got him out. Because I stopped being one more thing pulling at him. Dario did not move. He held himself with the stillness she had first read as coldness, and now understood as its opposite. A man who did not trust what would happen if he let go. That is where you learned it, he said. That is where I learned all of it, the good and the broken both. She made herself say the broken part, because he had shown her his silence stepping back into the dark of a stair, and it seemed only fair. It is also why my hands shake when a room turns to watch me. My father did not hit. He waited. He would stand behind me while I did some small, ordinary thing and wait for me to drop it, and then he would tell the room he had known I would. You take a small thing, he used to say, and make it a scene. After enough years, my hands started doing it before he even had to wait. I would drop the thing just from the weight of being watched. She turned her own steady hand over, looked at the palm. But under the table, with a frightened thing that needs me more than it is judging me, I have never once shaken, not then, not with your daughter. That is the whole of me in one wall, steady where I am needed, ruined where I am only looked at. For a while, there was only the rain. Where is he now? Dario asked. Your brother. Grown, safe, far away and happy, and he does not call me much, because I am the person who was there in the bad house, and people do not always keep the ones who saw them under the table. She said it without bitterness, which had taken years. But he came out. That is the thing I hold on to. He was a silent child under a table, and now he is a loud man at a barbecue 3 time zones away who talks over everyone. They come out. If you make the room and you wait and you do not lean in, they come out. Even the ones who took a year. Even yours. Dario looked at the smiling woman too big for the page. Her name was Sabine, he said. Sorrel had known there would be a name. She had not known it would land in her chest like a dropped plate. She drew off the edges of everything, he said, as though the page were the thing that was wrong. She knew me before the name meant what it means now, before men lowered their voices, when I was still someone a woman could laugh at, and she laughed at me constantly, and I let her, because she was the only person alive who wanted nothing from me except the joke. His jaw worked. Everyone I have met since met the name first. They calculate. They cannot help it. I cannot help watching them do it. Sabine never learned how. Della never learned how. Those are the only two people who were ever simply mine, and I have already lost one of them to what I am. How? Sorrel said gently, at the doorway of it, not leaning in. A car, he said. On a road she took because I was meant to take it and did not. They called it an accident. I have never been able to prove it was not meant for me instead of her, and I have never been able to prove it was, and I have spent a year in the space between those two things. He looked at his sleeping daughter. Della was in the back. She was not hurt. She has not said a whole sentence since. The doctors have a word for it. I have a different word. I think she saw the exact moment the world proved it could take the person you love off a road, and she decided all at once, the way she decides everything, that words were not worth the risk of being heard by a world like that. Sorrel looked from the man to the child, to the crooked house with its 4 people, the smiling woman, the window child, the faceless largeness at the door, and the small one hidden under the table who was somehow both her brother and this girl and, she understood now, a little bit herself. She let a word out for me, Sorrel said. The first evening I met her, after 9 doctors and a year of silence. That is not because I am gifted, it is because I am the one person in her life who is not afraid of the world taking things. I have already had things taken. She can smell it on me. It makes me safe to speak into. She looked up at him. You are afraid all the time. That is not a flaw in you. But she can smell that too, and it is very loud, and it is the thing standing between her and the next word. He did not defend himself. He looked at her across his sleeping daughter for a long moment. And the rain kept on, and when he finally spoke it was the sentence that should have warned her, the sentence she would take out and turn over later when everything had gone wrong. I would take the world apart, Dario said, before I let it reach either of you again. She heard the love in it. She did not yet hear the cage. The first jealousy was small and had 4 strips of toasted cheese in its fist. Della had decided in the total way of children that Sorrel was hers. It became a comedy the evening Dario reached across the small table to move a cup out of his daughter's elbow's way, and Della, without looking up from her drawing, moved her whole body a determined inch to put herself between her father and the woman cutting the cheese. Dario looked at the top of his daughter's head. She is guarding you, he said. From me. She is 5. Sorrel set down the plate. Everything is a fortress at 5. I owned this fortress first. He said it dryly, but he was watching Della lean her small shoulder against Sorrel's arm like a sentry, and something moved under the dryness. I find that I understand the feeling. Sorrel's knife paused on the bread. She did not look up, because looking up would have made it a scene. Eat your fortress food, she said. It is getting cold. The second jealousy was not small, and it wore a soft gray cardigan and asked good questions. His name was Soren, and Sorrel had asked for him herself. Not a specialist with a recorder and a chart of faces, she had told Dario, but someone who worked in speech the way she worked in rooms, who understood that you do not pull a word out of a child, you make it safe to drop one. Dario had found the best such person in the country and flown him in, on Sorrel's terms, no recording, no observing, without the child knowing. Soren turned out to be about Sorrel's age, easy in his body, willing to sit on a floor without treating it as a sacrifice. He watched one session and, instead of correcting her, took out a notebook and wrote down what she did and asked her opinion twice and wrote down both answers. You should have trained in this, Soren said afterward on the landing, while Dario waited a few steps below with a stillness that had gone from warm back to something harder. You have better instincts than people with letters after their names. I trained under a kitchen table, Sorrel said. There is no certificate. Your instincts are the certificate. Soren smiled, an uncomplicated smile, the smile of a man whose worst memory was probably a bad grade. Listen, there is a working dinner next week. People in the field, you would be the most interesting person in the room. Come, I will introduce you as a colleague, because that is what you are. He put his hand, briefly, kindly, on her arm. On the stair below, Dario Malvasi did not move a muscle, and the not moving filled the whole stairwell. Later, when Soren had gone, Sorel carried the cups to the hot plate, and Dario stood in the middle of her small room with his coat over his arm and did not put it on. He touched your arm, Dario said. He is a colleague. Colleagues have arms. He asked you to dinner. You were listening from the stair. He asked you within one flight of me. That is not a private conversation. He was, she realized, genuinely angry, and had no right on earth to be, and knew he had no right and could not stop. Did you accept? Sorrel set the cups down and turned around and looked at him. This man in her 3 small rooms with a cathedral booked, and a bride and a date on the first Saturday of June, standing in the wreckage of his own composure over a speech therapist in a cardigan. You are getting married, she said quietly, in a church you paid to re-roof, in a little under 3 months, to a woman who called me something you found in the rain. You do not get to ask me that. You do not get to feel that. You have not earned 1 single degree of it. I know, he said. That was all. Not a defense, not a maneuver. Just the 2 flat words, and the sight of a man who controlled a city standing perfectly still, while the one thing he could not control moved across his face and settled there and refused to leave. I know exactly what I am, he said. I know what is on the calendar. I know I have no right to the way I feel walking into this room and finding another man's hand on you. I am telling you the truth because it is the only thing left that I can give you that I have not already promised to someone else. His voice was very low. Jealousy is not love. I am aware. But it is the most honest thing I own, and I would rather hand you an honest, ugly thing than a beautiful, arranged one. The rain had stopped. In the other room, the child breathed. Sorrel became aware that she had crossed half the distance between them without deciding to, the way the apology had left her at the dinner, the way every true thing left her ahead of her permission, and that his hand had come up and stopped, hovering, not touching, waiting, having learned somewhere in these weeks not to close the last inch without being told. You can, she heard herself say. And then she heard the date, the first Saturday of June, ring in her own head like the small clear bell that meant stop, and she stepped back before his hand could land and put the width of the room between them, and her voice shook once, and she let it. But not while there is a Saturday with her name on it, she said. I have been the woman a man kept on the side of a promise he made to someone else. I will not be her again, not even for you, especially not for you. Dario lowered his hand. He put on his coat. At the door he paused and did not open it, and asked whether he should come tomorrow, and for the first time she did not say yes ahead of her permission. Tomorrow is for Della, she said. Not for this. He nodded and went down the leaning stair he had mended, and Sorrel stood in the room with the drawing on the wall and understood that she had just done the hardest and most correct thing, and that being correct was going to keep her warm for exactly none of the night. Ottavia arranged the photograph. It was for the announcements, she said, the formal ones, the family as it would be, and it would take an hour, and Della would wear the dress that had been made for her, and she would stand where she was put and look at the camera and smile, because that was what daughters did in photographs. And it was long past time the child learned to behave like part of a family, instead of like a small feral secret kept in a wine cellar. Sorrel was not invited. Sorrel heard about it the way she heard about everything from a meal after it had already gone wrong. They had dressed the child and put her in the center of a bright, cold room in front of lights, and a man with a camera and a woman clapping her hands to make her look up. "Look here, darling, smile." And every single thing about it was the loud end of the table and the plate too hot to hold, and the 9 doctors in the world that took people off roads, all at once, aimed at a 5-year-old in a stiff new dress. Della had done what she did. She had gone rigid, and then she had gone down, folding to the floor of the bright room and pressing herself into the corner where the lights could not fully reach, past crying, into the high, thin place. And Ottavia had said, in front of the photographer and the stylist and Dario, the thing that traveled the whole way across the city and into Sorrel's small rooms. She had said, "She does this on purpose. She takes one simple thing and makes it a scene." Sorrel was there in 20 minutes. She did not remember the tram. She came into the bright, cold room and did not look at Ottavia or the camera or the lights or Dario standing white and useless at the edge of his own life. She went to the corner and sat down on the floor a body's length from the child, not touching. And she took the small brass bell out of her coat pocket because she carried it now, everywhere, and she set it on the floor between them where the child could see it. "This is yours," she said, into the high, thin sound. "You can ring it, and every light in this room goes off. You do not owe any of these people a face. Ring it or do not. I am going to sit here either way." The room, which had been full of clapping and coaxing, went quiet around the sound of a waitress, giving a mute child permission to refuse it. Della's hand came out of the tight knot of her body. She did not ring the bell. She crawled the body's length across the cold, bright floor and put herself against Sorrel's side, under Sorrel's arm, into the part of the room that was not waiting for her, and she pressed her face into the black work coat, and she breathed, and slowly, the way you lay a plank across water, she came down out of the high place. Ottavia's voice, tight now. "You see, she has trained the child to run to the help." Sorrel looked up. She was aware of every eye in the room the way she had been aware at the dinner, and she waited for her hands to start, and her hands did not start. Because there was a frightened thing under her arm that needed her more than the room was judging her, and that was the one condition under which Sorrel Ashby had never once shaken in her life. "I am clumsy sometimes," Sorrel said, and her voice went even, and she let it stay even. "I drop things when a room turns to watch me, because I was raised by someone who stood behind me and waited for exactly that. So you are right about one of us in this room taking a small thing and making it a scene, but it was not her, and it was never her. She did not make this. You did. You put a grieving child in front of a wall of lights and demanded she perform being fine for a photograph, and when she could not, you called it a tantrum, because a tantrum is easier to be angry at than a wound is to be patient with." She got to her feet, the child rising with her wrapped around her leg. "You can keep the photograph. I am going to keep the child breathing. We are each welcome to the thing we think matters." No one clapped. No one coaxed. Dario had not said one word, and when Sorrel finally looked at him, she understood why. He was not looking at Ottavia. He was looking at his daughter breathing against a waitress's leg in a corner of a bright, cold room, and there was something in his face that had gone all the way past composure into a country with no flag, and Sorrel knew with a certainty that frightened her more than the lights had frightened the child, that the wedding on the first Saturday of June had just died in that man's chest, and that he did not know it yet, and that when he found out, it was going to take everything with it that was not nailed down. That night, in the small rooms, with Della finally asleep, the two of them sat on the floor because there was nowhere else, and the width of the room they had kept between them for weeks was simply gone, worn through, and neither of them mentioned it. "Who does this for you?" Dario said. "Does what?" "Sits on the floor, when the room gets louder than the danger." He looked at her. "You do it for her. You did it for your brother. Who has ever done it for you?" Sorrel opened her mouth to make it a joke. Nothing came. The true thing came instead, the way true things did before she could stop it. "No one," she said. "People mostly wait for me to drop something. It is a shorter wait than sitting on a floor." Then everyone who has ever known you, Dario said, has been watching the wrong moment. He took her hand off her own knee and turned it over and looked at the steady palm of it, and he lifted it, and he pressed his mouth to the backs of her fingers. Once, carefully, the way a man handles a thing he has decided he is not allowed to break, and he did not ask for anything else, and she did not offer anything else. And it was, in that small room with the child asleep on the only soft thing she owned, more than enough. Nothing else happened that night. She would think later, through everything that came after, that it was the last hour the whole thing was clean. The threat came on a Tuesday, and it came, as such things do, through Marek. He found the photograph under the door of the small room at the Vespera, the way these things are always found, so that the finding is itself part of the message. It showed Sorrel and Della on the leaning stair of the dead diner, taken from across the street, the two of them side by side and unaware of the lens. On the back, in a hand that was trying to look like no hand at all, someone had written, "The great man has a soft place now. A soft place is a way in." Dario read it once. Sorrel watched him read it once, and she watched the road Sabine should not have been on come up behind his eyes, and she knew before he said a single word that she had lost, not him. She had lost the argument they had not yet had. By that evening her key to the small room did not work. By the next morning there were two men she did not know parked outside her building. By the afternoon Marek came, apologetic, immovable, to tell her that Miss Della would be staying inside the house for a while, that the sessions were suspended for everyone's safety, that Mr. Malvasi would of course honor her contract in full, and that a car was available to take her anywhere she wished to go and would be available. The unspoken part went, whether she wished it or not. She went to the house. They let her in, which told her he had told them to, which told her he wanted to say it to her face, which was the one shred of him she could still respect. He was at the window of a room that could have held her entire flat, with his back to the door, exactly as he had stood the first night in the small room off the cellar, and he did not turn. "You cut me off from her," Sorrel said, "without asking me. There was no decision to make. There is always a decision. You made it. You just made it alone." She came into the enormous room. "Where is she?" "Safe." "Where is she, Dario?" "Upstairs, with Yara. She has not spoken since I brought her in." His voice was flat, and under the flat was something coming apart. "She rang the bell for an hour, the one you gave her. She kept ringing it and no one came, because the only person it was ever a signal to was standing where a man with a camera could reach her. So bring me to her." "I cannot. You will not. I will not." He turned then. He looked terrible in the specific way of a powerful man who has arranged the whole world to his liking and cannot arrange the one thing. "Someone photographed the two of you through a lens from across a street and told me where the soft place is. I have buried the person I loved off a road that was meant for me. I am not going to stand at a second grave and know I saw the lens and did nothing. You will be protected whether you consent to it or not, and she will be behind these walls whether it heals her or breaks her, because a frightened living child is a thing I can still hold, and I have learned exactly what it costs to be too late." And there it was. Sorrel heard it land, the whole shape of it, and it did not sound like a mafia boss. It sounded like her father saying it was for her own good. It sounded like a man years ago handing her a car she could not drive without asking. It sounded like every person who had ever made a cage and called it an arm around her shoulders. "You watched me," she said, and her voice was very quiet, quieter than the room. "For 3 months you watched me give that child a bell so she would always have a way out. You watched me sit by the door every time she rang it. You wrote it on the back of a contract with your own hand, that no one would decide for her without her knowing. You built your whole apology to me out of the word ask. And the first time you are frightened, the very first time you take a 5-year-old's exit away and you take mine away in the same afternoon, and you call it love. It is love." His hands had closed at his sides. "It is fear," Sorrel said. "Wearing love's coat. I know the coat. I have had it put over my shoulders my whole life by people who were only trying to keep me safe. Do not." Her breath caught. Do not do the one thing I told you the world already did to her. Do not teach her that the people who love you are the ones who decide your no does not count. Della needs you." He said it fast, low, the last card, the one under the table. "She will not come back from this without you. Come inside the walls. For her." The room went silent. She watched him hear it. She watched the exact instant Dario Malvasi understood what he had just reached for, that he had picked up the child and used her as a hand to hold Sorrel in place, that he had turned the one clean thing between them into a leash, and she watched the regret hit him so hard he actually stepped back from it. "You are right," he said immediately, before she could. "I should not have. I taught her a bell was a way out. I will not turn her into a way to trap you. I am sorry. That was the worst thing I have ever said in this room, and I have said terrible things in this room. Then hear the rest of it." Sorrel took the small brass bell out of her coat pocket, her own, the twin of the one she had given Della, the one that meant stop, that meant you may always leave, that meant no one gets to decide for you. She set it on the enormous desk between them, gently, the way you set down a thing you love. "I am ringing it," she said. "For myself. This is me, telling you, I am done being in this room. You do not get to ask me why. That was the whole rule. That was the rule you signed." His face, when he understood she was using her own exit, was the face of a man watching the one door in a burning house close from the inside. "Where will you go?" he said. "That," Sorrel said, "is no longer a question you are allowed to ask me." She left the bell on his desk. She left the car at the curb. She walked out of the house that could have held her whole life 100 times over and down to the street, past the men who did not follow her because he did not, after all, quite dare, and she went up the leaning stair alone, and she sat in her 3 small rooms with the drawing that said "Stay" on a wall she was about to have to leave, and she did not cry until the light was gone, because crying in the light felt too much like being watched. She opened the diner. She did it because the alternative was lying in the 3 small rooms listening to the silence where a child used to breathe, and because the counter tin was heavier than it had ever been now that there was nothing to spend the evenings on, and because somewhere under the grief was a plank of the old stubbornness that had gone in after a boy under a table when she was 7 years old and had never once believed a locked thing had to stay locked. She used the tin. She used her wages. She took a small loan from the only bank that would look at her, at a rate that made her laugh, and she scrubbed 2 years of dust off the long counter and lit the dark griddle, and she put a light in the window that said, in plain letters, that the counter was open. She named it a thing that was not her own name, because she had learned that a room does not have to carry the name of the person who is afraid in it. She named it a room where the seat was always taken by whoever needed it, which on the sign came out as one word, and the word she chose was open, because she had decided that a person walking cold down the wrong end of the tram line should be able to look up and read the only promise that had ever mattered to her, that no one would be turned away from the table. Her first regular was a night bus driver who ate at the end of a shift and did not want to talk. Her second was a girl of about 19 who came in from the cold and nursed 1 coffee for 3 hours, and Sorrel let her, and did not ask why, and did not lean in, and after a week the girl started talking all at once the way they do. Her third was her brother. Bram came because she called him. She had not called him in 2 years, and she called him the night she opened, and she said only that she had made a room, and would he come and sit in it, and there was a long silence on the line, the old silence, the under-the-table silence, and then her loud grown brother said, in a voice that was suddenly 7 again, that he would get on a plane. He sat at the counter for a whole weekend and talked over everyone, and once, only once, near the end, he put his hand over hers on the counter and said, "You always did know how to make the room, Sora, even when it was the only thing you could do." And that was the closest either of them ever came to naming it, and it was enough, and it was the first thing in weeks that had been. Dario did not come. She had braced for him to come. She had braced for the car at the curb, the men, the too large gift, the beautiful arranged thing slid across the counter to replace the honest ugly one. None of it came. And slowly she understood what the absence was, and it undid her more than any siege could have. He was letting her go. He, who removed choices from rooms the way other men removed their coats, was standing outside a door and not opening it, because she had told him that was the whole of what she needed. And he had finally, too late, at the cost of everything, learned to do it. She heard the rest of it sideways, the way she heard everything. From Emile, who heard it from the florists, who were, that season, cancelling rather than arranging. There would be no wedding on the first Saturday of June. He had called it off. Not, the story went, with any drama. He had simply told Octavia Wren that he could not stand in a cathedral he had paid to re-roof and promise a life to a woman who had looked at a grieving child and seen a tantrum, and that a man who did that would be teaching his daughter in front of witnesses that this was what a family looked like, and that he would sooner burn the cathedral down. Octavia had left the city. She had left, the florists said, promising a great many things, and forgetting, as she always did, nothing. And here was the part that Sorrel turned over and over on the long nights behind the counter, the part that told her he had understood, finally, all the way down. He did not send her word that the wedding was off. Not a note, not a message through Marek, not a single line that said the Saturday no longer had a name on it, come back. Because to send it would have been to make his sacrifice a lever. It would have been the child used as a hand all over again, only this time the hand would have been his own broken life held out to pull her in. He had learned that a gift is a leash when the giver is watching to see it work. So he made the largest gift of his life, and he made sure she found out about it from a florist, from the side, in a way he could take no credit for, so that if she ever came back, it would be because she chose the room and not because he had staged one. He sat, Emile said, most evenings, with his silent daughter, in a house gone quiet as a held breath, and he did not photograph her, and he did not send Sorrel word that the child was fading, though she was, because he had promised, on the back of a contract, that he would never turn the girl into a message. He was keeping the one promise in the dark, where no one could see him keep it. Sorrel was closing the diner on a cold Thursday, the open light off, the stools up on the counter, when she heard on the leaning stair to her rooms above a sound she knew in her teeth. A small, uneven step, and then a second. And a small hoarse voice, used up from a long cold road it should never have walked alone, saying the only word it had ever trusted the world with. Stay. Sorrel dropped the cloth on the counter and did not remember crossing the room. Della sat on the leaning second step, the one Dario had mended, in a coat too thin for the weather, mud to the knees of her small trousers, the brass bell clutched in both hands and a crooked drawing of her own folded to nothing in her pocket. It was the bell Sorrel had left on an enormous desk across the whole sleeping city, which meant the child had gone into her father's study and taken back the exit the grown woman had surrendered. Sorrel would learn later that Marek had followed her the entire way, one block behind, and had not stopped her, and had not carried her, because he had stood in enough of the wrong rooms to know a child making the only choice anyone had ever let her make. He had only called the house once he was sure where she was going. Sorrel came down onto the cold step and did not sweep the child up, even now, even shaking. She came down to the step's height and let the girl keep the bell. You cannot keep crossing the whole city, Sorrel said, every time you miss someone. Della looked at her with the straight-line mouth. Then, deliberately, the way she did everything, she rang the bell once, a small, clear note in the cold. She was not asking to stop. She had learned that a bell was a thing she controlled, and she had carried it across a city to ring it at the one person who had ever meant it, and Sorrel understood she was ringing it to make the room start again. She put her forehead against the child's cold forehead and held the small ringing hand and let herself, finally, be chosen. The headlights came up the dark street a few minutes later, slow, and stopped a respectful distance from the door. Dario Malvasi got out into the cold and did not come to the step. He stood by the car with his hands empty. No gift, no men. Only a father who had driven across a city a block behind his own runaway child, because his man had not been able to take her choice from her either. "Is she hurt?" he said. Cold, furious, whole. Sorrel stood, the child rising with her, wrapped around her leg. "She rang the bell at me. She is not asking to stop. She is telling me to open." He looked at the dark window, the plain word behind it unlit. He looked at the whole small, warm room a woman had built out of a coffee tin and a stubbornness that went in after children under tables. He had spent his life stepping through doors and taking every chair without asking. He stood now at the very edge of a light he had not built, hands empty, and did the one thing that had cost him a city and a cathedral, and very nearly a daughter to learn. "May I come in?" he said. The question traveled through every room they had ever stood in. The dinner where a waitress sat in a forbidden chair, the cellar where a man stepped back into the dark so a child would not watch him weep. The 2 small rooms where he had asked, at 2 in the morning, only to sit. The enormous house where he had, once, decided her no did not count. And now, the edge of a light that was unmistakably, entirely hers. Sorrel looked at him a long moment, then down at the child with the bell. She thought of Bram, who had come out from under the table and taken 20 years and a phone call to sit in a room she made. They came out. If you made the room and waited and did not lean in, they came out. Even the most feared man in the city, who had needed to lose everything before he could stand at the edge of a light and ask. "The seat is taken," Sorrel said. She watched his face do the small, stricken thing it had done at 2 in the morning over a single chair, and she let him have 1 second of it because she was not a cruel woman, and he had earned the second by not assuming. "By you," she said. "If you can sit in a room you did not pay for. If you can watch me run a counter you are not allowed to buy. If you can love the crooked thing and never once try to straighten it, then the seat is taken. By you." She stepped back and opened the door that did not sit quite square in its frame, and never would because she had chosen it that way. "Come in, mind the step. He mended it once and it still leans, and I have decided I like it better honest." Dario crossed the wrong end of the tram line, wiped his shoes on a mat no one had told him to wipe them on, and came into the room. He did not take the chair until she pointed to it. He sat where he was told, in a diner that would never carry his name, across a counter he would never be allowed to own, and Della climbed onto the stool between them with the bell still in her fist and rang it once more, softly, not to stop and not to start, only because it was hers, and no one in this room was ever going to take it. The girl who had not spoken in a year looked at the 2 of them, and at the dark griddle warming under Sorrel's hand, and at the plain light coming on again in the window. And she said a complete sentence, her first, in the used-up voice of someone who had decided, all at once and without telling anyone, that the world might be worth the risk of being heard by after all. "Leave it on," Della said, looking at the light, "so they know we are open." And Sorrel left it on. Months later, when the diner had regulars who did not know it had ever been dusty, and a loud girl did her wandering homework at the end of the counter and talked to anyone who sat near her, a man who commanded half the city came in each evening and asked every single time whether the seat was taken, and was told every single time that it was, by him. If he was still willing to sit in a room he could not own. Ottavia Wren came in out of the cold only once, on a night she must have thought no one who mattered would see. She sat at the counter, because there was nowhere in that room that was not the counter, and Sorrel poured her a coffee and did not charge her, because the whole point of the sign was that no one cold was turned away from the table, not even her. "You kept the child," Ottavia said into the coffee. "No, she kept me." Sorrel looked down the counter at Della, loud now, drawing a crooked house on the back of an order ticket. The smiling woman still too big for the page, and a second figure beside her now, also too big, also smiling. Everyone thought she was the one who could not speak. She was only waiting for a room that would not make her perform being fine. That is all any of them are ever waiting for. The child everyone calls broken. The man everyone calls a monster. Pain gets called all sorts of things by people who are looking at the wrong moment. Ottavia set down the coffee. At the door she paused. The step leans, she said. I know, said Sorrel. I like it honest. Mind it on your way out. Della had refused to leave a waitress after a single folded napkin. Her father had taken a city, a cathedral, and very nearly a grave to learn the same thing his daughter had known in an evening. But once Sorrel Ashby left the light on and told him the seat was taken, the most feared man in the city became, every evening for the rest of their lives, the easiest man in the world to keep. She had finally built the one room no one had ever built for her. She had left the door unlocked, and she was never after that the one who was asked to leave.